This is going to be a quick overview on APA format. I'm going to run through some of the most important things. There's obviously quite a bit that I'm not going to get into. I'll always refer you back to the APA manual. It's American Psychological Association. The 6th edition, which was published in 2010, will have a lot of the go-to information that you'll need. I am going to try to, between the paper and the presentation here, touch on just about everything that you're going to need. So first we're going to go through the presentation, and then in the second video you will see the paper. So key information with APA is 12-point Times New Roman. You want to make sure your paper is double spaced with 1-inch margins on all sides, which is pretty much standard. You're going to have your contents, which are your title page, the main body, and your reference page. Depending on the paper, you're going to have different lengths of your main body. Always make sure you have an introduction and a conclusion. Those are two key areas. In addition, some professors may want you to have an abstract, and I did include that in the sample paper so you can see what the important aspects of an abstract are. It always goes on a separate page prior to the main body of your paper. Your title page is going to have the title of your work, so whatever it is, whether title page is your title, you would have that as the beginning, your author's name, and then the institutional affiliation. So what college it is that you're writing the paper for is included on there. What to cite and when to cite. If it's a fact, you need to make sure that you're giving a citation for that factual information. Anything that's not common knowledge should be cited. So if I'm saying, the sky is blue, obviously that's common knowledge. I don't need to cite it. But if I say atrial fibrillation is a cardiac dysrhythmia that has no discernible P's and it's an irregular rhythm, although I know that because it's something that I teach, that's not common knowledge. I would really need to make sure that I'm pulling in a citation for that information. So I would cite it within, and then I would include that citation on my reference page. I would reference that work. So it's better to give credit than to take a zero. And what I mean by that is if you're putting information into a paper and it's not common knowledge or you're taking it from a source, you have to give credit to that source. Taking a zero would basically mean if you're including stuff and you're not citing and referencing it, you're plagiarizing, which you could end up with a zero on the paper, a zero in the course, or potentially even out of a program for plagiarism. Although I know that some of it's not intentional, it still is frowned upon, and you need to make sure that you protect yourself by citing, and citing some more. You can never put too many citations in a paper. You can, however, put too many quotations in a paper. So another thing that's important to know is that when I say cite, I don't mean direct quotes from a source, and that's one of the major things that I see students making mistakes in. What you want to make sure you're doing is using paraphrasing and summarizing as well as direct quotes, in always giving credit to the person who wrote the information. You still have to cite, even though it's not their exact words. You have to show where your information came from. So if you were to say, according to Professor Pawlowski, 2016, and I'll show you on the next page, atrial fibrillation is a irregular rhythm with no discernible P's, you could put that in summarizing, or you could put it in direct quotes. I'll show you on the next slide what I mean by that. So again, on here you see towards the bottom it says if you're paraphrasing an idea from work, you have to still include the reference, which would be the last name and the year of the publication. So Pawlowski, 2016, discusses the importance of APA. And then in the next sentence it says in our sample paper, Pawlowski, 2016, includes headings, in-text citations, and references. So those are two ways that you can paraphrase and summarize information without using the direct quotes. Above here, you see how you would use the direct quotes. So it is important to learn APA format, which is a direct quote. You would have to include the page number that you got the information from. So it's not only the last name and the year, but the page number. If you're using a direct quote, it's okay, and it's not a bad idea to include the page numbers when you're using paraphrasing, but it's not required. But you could include them. It wouldn't be a bad thing to do to show where the information comes from. In-text citations by authors. Again, in here, this just talks about one author versus multiple authors. So when you have one author, that's the second bullet here, Pawlowski 2016 discusses the importance of utilizing APA. It's just the author's last name, the year. If you have multiple authors, you can see the next line, you would list them, and then 2016 after the final author is how you would do that. And that's on page 177 in your APA manual. The sample paper we're going to go over in the next video, and that actually will have your subheadings and all that on it as well. Your reference page. What's very important is that you have references centered on a separate page. It just says references. There's no quotations, there's no colon, it's not bolded, and it's not underlined. It just says references, and then it lists them below. There's a link on here to Purdue OWL, which is a great resource on how to set up your reference page. So when you are doing your reference page, the other thing that's important, again, no colon, no underline, no quotations, just references centered on its own page, the final page of your paper. You'll see down below, I've actually referenced the APA manual. So you would start with your, alphabetically, starting with A and ending in Z. You would put your first citation, or your first reference in here, sorry. American Psychological Association, you'll see 2010. It talks about, it includes the information that you have to include in your reference. And you'll see in the sample paper that I'm referring you to those pages in the APA manual. Your first line is flush left, and your second and following lines of that reference are all going to be indented. So the first line of every reference is flush left, and the next lines below it are indented. A lot of people do it backwards and indent the first line and then flush left the rest. That's not correct. It's first line flush left, next lines are indented. And again, when you look at the sample page, you'll be able to see some examples of journals, books, etc. Numbering in APA is another thing that we see people not doing correctly. If it's 1 through 9, it has to be written out as ONE or NINE, if you get my drift here. You have to use the word and not the number if it's below 10. Numbers 10 and over can be written numerically as 10, 11, 12. And that's in the APA manual on page 111. References here for my presentation. Again, you see the references is centered. Everything's flush left with the next pages indented. So the second video is going to actually, or the continuation of this is going to actually capture the sample paper.